Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our third part in our series of Black Cambridge and COVID-19. I want to start off by saying happy Juneteenth weekend, of course, as well as acknowledging all the fathers out there. Black fathers matter. Yes. So thank you for joining us, and we will begin our segment. This program will focus in on an intergenerational conversation on COVID-19. And of course, I'm always elated to be in partnership with my friend and colleague, former Mayor and City Councilor Denise Simmons. Denise?
Thank you, Manikka. Again, it's a pleasure. Happy Juneteenth to all, and happy Father's Day to all the dads and all those men that stand in as fathers. You know, we honor you all. You know, I'm so proud and happy to be here with my co-conspirator, co-facilitator, co-moderator, Manikka Bowman, as we lift up the conversation around Juneteenth and what that means to all of us, our panelists, to our community, to our state, and to our country. And there's so much going on in these times. The fact that the man that sits in the corner office wanted to choose Juneteenth in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as the staging for a rally goes to show you that we are on the road, but not there yet. So for me, when I think of Juneteenth, I think of all the things that still need to be done. It's an opportunity to observe Black African-American history, and that's important. It's important that we live it, breathe it, tell it, teach it to our children, and have that conversation all the time. I queried my granddaughter just yesterday saying, what is Juneteenth? And she told me what it was. I said, that's good, you can come for dinner tomorrow. So it's just making sure that our children know our history. But that said, it means there's so much more that we need to do so that we can still get the full benefit of that contract called the Constitution, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I look forward to this conversation. I look forward to hearing our panelists who are wonderful. So to my co-moderator, I turn it back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilor Simmons. You know, it's been, you know, an interesting time. I say that we are in the middle of living history, and there's going to be a point when our children and grandchildren will look at us and say, hey, how did you manage 2020 and all the things that was thrown at you, particularly as African-American people? And you get to tell that story and live that with them. And that's the conversation we want to have today. And we're going to have it from an intergenerational perspective. So I want to introduce our wonderful panel that's joining us today. We have Jeff Davis, who is a Cambridge resident and citizen, a concerned citizen and strategist, HR strategist, as well as a parent in the Cambridge Public School System. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. We have Maya CLEMENTE, who is a leader at CRLS and a student there. Thank you, Maya, for joining us. We have Ken Reeves, who is the president of the NAACP and former mayor and city councilor here in Cambridge. And last but certainly not least, we have AISHA Francis, Dr. Francis, who is the chief of staff for the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. So I'm going to get us started. We're going to start this off talking about Juneteenth. And I'm really excited about this weekend and everything that it means, because I actually grew up about an hour and 30 minutes away from Galveston, Texas. And Juneteenth was something that I was born into. I can't really remember a time in my life where I didn't know that it exists. And so you fast forward to today and you see that there are major companies giving the day off to their employees. You see a flag being raised. It happened at City Hall this Friday. Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui, for being a leader on that, and the parents within the Cambridge Public School System that advocated for that to happen. There's this cosmic shift that's happening that is really highlighting the Black experience in a way that we've never seen it before, particularly in my lifetime, at least. And I'm just curious, that's my context as it relates to Juneteenth. But I'm curious for everyone here, what does Juneteenth mean to you? And when did it get on your radar? So Maya, when did Juneteenth become on your radar?
So I learned about it a few years ago, I want to say, when I was actually watching a show, Blackish. But I think that I've never learned about it before, and I grew up in Cambridge, so it wasn't like I never heard of it. But I had done some research in classes last year because I took a history class, and I learned that it was like when everyone was finally freed from slavery and when the emancipation got like word came around to everyone. But I think it's important to like know about because it serves as a reminder that no one's free until everyone is free. And I think it's really relevant right now because with all the protests happening and like not truly feeling free anymore. So I think it's important to learn
Yeah, Maya, thank you for saying that. And now you've added something to my to-do list as Vice Chair of the Cambridge School Committee. We need to figure out how to make sure that Juneteenth is a part of all of our science curriculum moving forward. So thank you for putting that on my radar. Jeff, tell me, how did you hear about Juneteenth?
Thank you for asking, Manikka. Similar to Maya, I actually heard about Juneteenth through the Blackish episode a few years ago. I sit here today kind of wearing my Father's Day gift with a whole host of pride and humility because I think it's a representation of the elevation of how the holiday is kind of, to Denise's earlier point, kind of gotten to a point where more people are embracing it. And once I found out about it, I instantly started to do some more research and figure out why hadn't I heard it, what happened, what did I miss the page, if there was ever a page in my script growing up in school. And no one, that I was familiar with had heard to it or referred to it as Juneteenth before. So knowing that like my paternal ancestors were escaped slaves from Arkansas and my maternal grandmother was a child sharecropper in Mississippi, it feels like for me, Juneteenth is a reclaiming of all those stories and victories of our history that have been taken from African Americans over our 400 years on this land. So it means everything to me, and I'm trying to kind of make up for the few decades I missed it before.
There's always room to make up and to celebrate Juneteenth. And I find it interesting. I'm curious about other people that, for me, it was a part of my life for so long. And, in this conversation, so new for everyone. So Aisha, Dr. Francis, tell us, Juneteenth. Oh, you're on mute still, Dr. Francis.
Yep, I'm doing it. Okay. I learned about Juneteenth in college. I am a graduate of Fisk University, which is a historically Black college and university in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm also from Nashville. And to my knowledge, at the time that I was growing up, there was not a strong tradition of Juneteenth in the community. Again, that's to my knowledge. So when I arrived on campus as a freshman in my teen years, I'm meeting Black people from around the world and around different parts of the country. That is when I was introduced to Juneteenth by folks from Texas and Louisiana. And I really had never heard of it. They told me about how they celebrated the tradition. And in that same semester, there's a core African-American rhetoric class that you took at Fisk, which was, we were assigned this book, Speech to Power by Gerald Early. You're reading all these orations and essays by Black people. And one of the ones, although it's not in the early text, but one of the ones we were assigned is Frederick Douglass's What to the Slave is the 4th of July, which is a speech he gave in Rochester, New York, actually on July 5th. But he really interrogates why we're celebrating Independence Day. And this was in 1852 when he delivered this at a time when Black people were not independent and we were not free. And so I, for myself, took on a tradition of reading that essay every 4th of July and really thinking about, what does it mean for me to be a citizen in this country and to think about the legacy of what it took for us to achieve the type of freedom that we have now, which isn't really full freedom, but it's as you said, we're on the road but not there. So I think when I moved to Boston, I was in an area where people did celebrate at Franklin Park with a big cookout, picnic kind of fanfare, and a very family friendly event. So that has been the arc of my understanding about Juneteenth.
Wonderful. I think it's interesting, Aisha, that you highlight Frederick Douglass and the resistance to what the 4th of July means in the context of Black people. And I think in the context of everything happening in the world right now, I think that people are starting to grapple with that tension in a way that we haven't seen before. Ken, I'm very curious, how have you experienced Juneteenth?
Well, I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and certainly never heard of it in my growing up days there. Really, I was introduced to Juneteenth in Cambridge. I have a friend, Richard Morrell, who's also known as Wiss, and he periodically liked to grab me and take me to something fun to do. So we were in Franklin Park in June with then it was more described to me as a Cambridge-Boston reunion. There's some real linkages between Black Cambridge and Black Boston. And it was just a wonderful picnic and seeing people you hadn't seen in years. And it was a wonderful family day. And the more I think about it, it was a real celebration of Blackness. So one thing I'm going to say to you, Manikka, and to you, Councilor Simmons, the Cambridge branch of the NAACP was one of the pioneer organizations to start the Martin Luther King holiday. We celebrated about 10 years before it became a federal holiday. And when you really think of it, Juneteenth was a celebration of the end of slavery, particularly a celebration for those who had been enslaved. So people with that legacy have a responsibility to celebrate the fact of freedom and make that freedom even more free. So I'm going to suggest we should get together and see if we can't support the notion that Juneteenth ought to really be a national holiday, because it's really something to celebrate. And while we are going to celebrate the eradication of racism in the country, we could blame that on Juneteenth too. So I see a way to make Juneteenth a real focal point for what might fix our nation.
Yeah, I definitely think that we're at this moment where the momentum is there to make it happen. I'm curious, Councilor Simmons, your thoughts. Do we have the momentum to move this forward and to have Juneteenth be a holiday that lives right alongside and celebrated as much as the 4th of July? Oh, you're on mute, Councilor Simmons.
Myself, thank you. I'm not good at basketball or sports metaphors, but let me see if I get this right. That was a good layup there, because one of the things that's going to be on Monday night's agenda, as I was thinking about it, we were putting in, it's very hard working remotely, and so we tried to get this in on the regular agenda, but it's on the late agenda, which is asking the city to look at making Juneteenth a citywide holiday, and that's the place to start. And why Cambridge? We were the first, and I believe you were around the time, Ken, when we started, if you were not the moving the shake around this, around Eid, when we started, the schools, it started in the schools, remember? When we were on the front lines, it was not easy, by the way, to take Columbus Day and make it Indigenous Peoples Day, and we took flack, and we still do about that. So Cambridge is certainly a good, it's fertile ground to launch that conversation. But I also agree it has to be a national movement, but you start local, and hopefully states will start will take up on it. Yeah, I was very happy to see Santander, which is a bank up the street here on Mass Avenue, that closed for the day in honor of Juneteenth. So, Manikka, when you say is the time right, well, the time is always right to do something right, but it's exceptionally so while people are mindful. We should start talking it up so that by the time we get to this time next year, people are making that, participating in an observance of Juneteenth, but not as a holiday, but a learning opportunity. You know, learning opportunity where we engage youth as well as, you know, Katie said something in our earlier talk about the griots of our community, of so many of them. And I don't want to start naming names because I'll forget somebody and they'll be mad at me. But, you know, the griots like the Zumba Evelyn's, Many Thousand Gone, who was rich and really dig deep, and the Kathleen Walcotts and the Pat Taylors, just to name a few. Folks, I know I didn't get everybody. But, you know, getting them to tell their stories and have a repository of those stories so that 100 years from now, when they are celebrating Juneteenth, they'll have a resource to go to. So it's not just about having the observance of Juneteenth, it's also having the history and the story behind it and the people whose lives were touched by it.
No, I could not agree with you more. And I was one of those individuals that voted to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And it was a very proud moment for me. And I think that with everything that's happening in our country and in our society and even in our city, we've had some really tense times over the past year, particularly at the high school. And I think that there are these moments when we don't tell our stories in a way that we can carry them and so multiple generations can know. I mean, just the sheer fact that you have a diversity of Blackness here that is beautiful. I love what I'm seeing in front of me right now. And even for us, as it relates to this holiday, Juneteenth, there was a diversity of how we all entered it. And so I think there's a way in which we can tell our stories in a different way that across generations, we can hold on to them. But I saw that Ken wanted to jump in. And I think you have to unmute though, Ken.
That better?
Yes.
Okay. I just would say that I would be remiss if I didn't mention that just this past Friday, we did have a Juneteenth celebration in Cambridge in front of the public library that was organized by my brother's keeper and Tony Clark and his executive committee. So we've already begun to have something that's official in Cambridge, and it was well attended, and the good spirit of the Black family was there, plus its many friends.
Wonderful. So I'm gonna, you know, that's a good note to pivot us to this conversation about COVID-19, because as much as we're celebrating, you know, we are still as a community, as a nation, as a world, responding to the death of George Floyd, and the impact that that's had on the globe has been remarkable. And we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And so I want to have a conversation with everyone. How have you been managing just this kind of tension that's happening within the Black community? How have you been managing COVID-19, and how has it impacted your life personally or professionally? Let's start with Dr. Francis.
As I reflect on the past 4 months, really, it has been a time of incredible stress and strain, but also resilience and adaptability. In my particular subject position, I am married with 2 young children. The transition to working from home without having school be an option for children is very difficult. And on the bright side, I have been exposed to the ways in which my children learn in an incredibly profound way. And I'm grateful for that. And at the same time, recognize that it is literally impossible to work and teach your young children at the same time. If your children are older, they have more autonomy and more independence. I think there's a different experience and it has its own difficulty. But the way that I've managed that particular aspect of things is, of course, my husband and I are doing shifts, if you will, but also just allowing myself to do less. And that has been hard, but it has been, what was required. So maybe that is one of the things that I will be able to take out of this experience whenever we get to the other side of it. And I do also have a lot of concern about my elders and others who we're all vulnerable to this disease, but others in my life who have compromised immunity and other things, I'm very concerned about their isolation and feel isolated from them, even with Zoom. So, you know, there have been bright spots, you know, some of the music and the battles on Instagram. I became an Instagram user because of COVID-19. I, you know, was part of Club Quarantine, not the first one. I got on the bandwagon late, but, you know, I've had some for the culture moments that have been really uplifting. The battle between Jill Scott and Erykah Badu was a highlight for me.
Yeah.
You know, I love Black women singers. I just love them, and the love that they shared between each other, and just it was just such a gratitude fest for each other's work. I took a lot away from that, and the intimacy of being able to see the people in their space, you know, creating supportive opportunities to still engage with each other in my friend network has been uplifting. And so that's kind of how I've gotten through it. It's like going from uplifting moment to uplifting moment, even as the days are full of drudgery.
Yeah, you know, Club Quarantine has given me all of my life, like Team Club Quarantine all the way. And so, you know, it's interesting, you know, Aisha, you talk about doing less, and, you know, I'm going to give a confession here today with everyone. I suffer from like strong Black woman syndrome. And, you know, it's this, you have to do everything for everyone, and, you know, and it's a part of public life, quite frankly. But I think it's a unique pressure for Black people, and particularly Black women. And, you know, as I go back to work this week, I went back to work to my day job in addition to the work that I do in the city of Cambridge. You know, I've had to really think about, like, what does it mean to be effective and to do less, because that's the moment that we're in. And I think particularly from an African-American or Pan-African perspective, if you're in a professional environment, it's very difficult to give yourself space to do that, because the judgment comes along with it, because, you know, racism is still a thing. But I might go to Maya. Maya, you come at it from a different perspective as a high school student. How have you been able to manage COVID-19?
So I'm in my junior year, and I got pulled out like halfway through. So that was kind of hard because we're like starting the college process now. So it was like just like stressed all over the place. But I do believe that I was like able to learn more about myself and how I learn and like what I want to do and like how I see the world through like watching everybody and how they process this time that we're living in now. So I think it's been a solid learning experience, but I also like have seen like the negative impacts it takes on people, so it's kind of like sad but also inspiring to like watch people go through it at the same time. So it's been interesting.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I know that you're also the parent of smaller kids too, so tell us, how have you managed?
Thank you. I think similar to Dr. Francis, I'm married with 2 small kids. And for me, I had to accept as well what I cannot control anymore. I had to come to this realization that, you know, we are at home during a pandemic, trying to parent, trying to work, trying to be good partners, and frankly, trying to keep your sanity and what's about you. So accepting what I can and cannot do and letting things go has been really helpful. I'm also wearing a shirt with a big tree on it with big old roots. And so part of that is like symbolic, I think, of me just anchoring myself in kind of my personal history and frankly, all of our kind of African-American and global, African community. And when I think about it, it's, you know, in truth, we as African-Americans are undefeated, you know, despite the injustices that have been made against us. And Juneteenth is part of celebrating that. And when I think about COVID, I heard the term COVID 1619 recently, and so between 1619 and COVID-19 this year, like I feel like these are the actual super predators in our community, and to Black and POC communities and systemic under-resourced communities. And so for me, it's allowing myself time to kind of unpack that trauma and the impact on myself and folks that I work with and live with. You know, at home, we've been getting by with some help from our friends. We were fortunate to able kind of group up before quarantine, and you know, in case things fell off, and they did. I had, God, I don't know where I'd be without them. I'd probably be like Obama grade right now. I don't even know. And so we're an active family. We bike a lot. We try to get out. Really appreciative to the city council for, you know, make sure we get Mem Drive closed again. We've been using that really, you know, pretty religiously. Manikka, you mentioned professional life. Like professionally, I work for an organization, City Years, an education reform organization, but we're in 29 Black and brown cities. And so an especially critical point for me is like, I think we've done a lot of great things organizationally to try to meet people where they are and support them during additional time. That includes like time off to like time out conversations about race and racism and its impact on education and urban America. But no amount of that time is going to take away people's pain. And so, you know, for me as an HR professional, really sitting with folks, kind of helping them process the grief that they're experiencing. And it is grief when we think about the loss of our normal life and expectations. It's a grieving process. And then you throw on violence in the Black community, systemic racism, and impacts of systemic racism. So I've been trying to get space through music, through the culture, you know, and through my own family history.
Thank you. Ken, tell us, how have you managed COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on you here in Cambridge?
You know, that question was directed to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I went dead for a minute. Well, you know, I'm here as the president of the Cambridge branch of the NAACP and a former elected official. So it's been very interesting. The NAACP has been very concerned about the children in the schools who are being schooled at home and what the level of the dosage of education is. And we've been contacted by any number of parents who are just, you know, really concerned that their particular child isn't getting everything they need. So that's been a real concern, and one that we had to visit the school superintendent with to see if we could be of any assistance, because we realize it's just a challenging period in general. Beyond that, there are some real concerns people have brought regarding, of course, George Floyd, and regarding, of course, Chris Cooper, who's the young man, the birder in Central Park, who just happens to be an old friend of mine. So it has, and just trying to help people think through these many assaults on people in America who are Black. So, and that causes us to try to think in the context of Cambridge, how are we? And there's the looming declaration now in I think it began in Somerville, but it came to Cambridge and certainly is in Boston, this declaration that we're really in a time of a public health emergency with respect to the racism in our society and culture. And this is the time to invent the cures, I would say. And so the NAACP is very involved in trying to think through what it is we might help do to cause others to be more reflective about a situation which we haven't created, but we certainly had to respond to. And then the person that's sitting here has had a number of interesting things. I've been very, very lucky that it has not been a period of anxiety for me. It's really been a time, my life has been so busy that to have this period where nobody expects you to be anywhere in particular to do or say anything has been good. So I've tried to connect with many of my friends over the years who I've not been as available to due to being in politics or teaching at MIT or things of that nature. So now I can lavish some time on those folks. And I think there has been some wonderful reconnections. But the one big trend in this time for me is for the first time in my lifetime, and my lifetime has been pretty long, I've not seen white people in a broad stroke way accept the responsibility to treat the disease as I have in this time. And I'm not clear that it will be continuous or even successful, but I would note that we're in a moment when we don't have to cure the disease. We have to get it off of us, but the hearts that have to be changed are not particularly our hearts. Our hearts could be changed by unburdening us with this scourge of racism. And it really is so systemic and it's unbelievable. And the last thing, in Cambridge, the other place a lot of time has had to be spent is the absolute dramatic impact of COVID-19 on Black Canterbridgeans. Mm-hmm. And how much more susceptible we have been, and the issues with respect to folks in nursing homes, where a huge percentage of the Cambridge cases have been. But just trying to figure out now, in Cambridge, we have always thought we had a safety net that would catch everybody. But because so many people are in frontline jobs or are living in overcrowded conditions where they cannot socially distance, they have, and their family members have been impacted and affected. So caring for the Cambridge community and also trying to teach old and young people in Cambridge that this is real, that wearing this mask is an important thing. So do it. And then we as a community sometimes have various mythologies that, this is all a ruse, or if you make this kind of a stew with some ginger and Jamaican something and drink that'll make it go away. We've been busy on many fronts, I'll say that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember early on in the pandemic, there were these rumors going around that like COVID-19 wasn't impacting Black people or that we were immune to it. And fast forward today, we are disproportionately being impacted by it. And, it leads me to this conversation, like you mentioned, this public health crises that we find ourselves in, which it's not just the Black community, but it's the world right now, the intersection of COVID and racism, which who would imagine that when we started this COVID journey, that it would have evolved into a place where our society had to really reflect on how it functions. And I like what Trevor Noah says, the contract that it has established amongst its residents that is not being fulfilled. But I think it's interesting in this time where multiple communities, not just the Black community, is taking on the mantle of pushback and protest around these conversations. You do still see a lot of people in the public square in the context of COVID. And so we've been put in this position where we're protesting for our lives while at the same time risking, taking certain risks with it. And so I'm really curious to hear how everyone's managed that dynamic. I found it interesting. I know people saw that, 45, moved his rally from June 19th to yesterday. And what I thought was so amazing, as we woke up this morning, that teenagers and young people across the country use K-pop and TikTok to fill up the list of people that would be attending that. And it was just a farce. And it was a way that you can protest via the internet. Shout out to all the young people that did that, right? Brilliant, brilliance. So I'm just curious, you know, I know we're all trying to do our best. We're all passionate about these issues, but how have you managed this tension of wanting to be out and have impact on the things happening in our world while at the same time trying to protect the health of the Black community? And we'll start with, let's see, Maya, let's start with you.
Okay, so I haven't been let out, so I wasn't able to go to any of the protests, and I think it's a really hard position to like fight people on going or on staying home, because it's like their choice to make whether you want to go fight for your life or stay home and fight for your life because you're not going out. But I think there's like tons of ways you can still do it from home, because on my Instagram and like my Snapchat, I've been like seeing like sign petitions, like do this, and I think it's like still a really good way to like protest or like fight for something without having to put yourself at risk like that. But that being said, I do think it's like really impressive that people are going out there and still like not really like saying that that's more important to them than like their health. And I think it's really impressive that they're going out there, but I do think it's like kind of sad that everyone has had to do that just to get their voices heard, even though it's been happening for so long, and that the whole world had to like join in for one person to listen to.
Yeah, it's a really difficult position for our community to be in. Jeff, how have you managed that tension?
Oh yeah, with a combo of applause and tears, if I can say that. I mean, I'm a big history buff and nerd, so for me, like George Floyd is like the tip of the spear, right? Like, we've had so many taken from us in the Black community over the last 7-8 years. And this is kind of like the latest chapter that we're working through, right? So I've tried to find like those uplifting moments. I think Dr. Francis mentioned this earlier, right? When I'm thinking about just like a global community, like the global African diaspora is standing up, and there are allies and co-conspirators standing up with us and saying that. And I think the gift of COVID-19 is that people are less distracted, right? We don't have all the sports and all the other things going on. Like, news cycles are spinning to try to keep our attention. But when you see like Black lives taken, without, recompense, like it's great to see that others in the global world are stepping up. Personally, our family has attended a protest in Cambridge Common. I've been having almost incessant conversation with friends and family members about how do we look in the mirror and do the self-work about how we might keep working a better work to live anti-racist lives and share that with others.
Yeah, Ken, how have you managed the push and pull of that dynamic with COVID and having to protest against racism?
Well, in 1967, I was a junior in high school, and the Detroit riots broke out just down the street from where I lived. So that was more than 50 years ago. And the cause of those riots was unrest due to police brutality to Black people. And so more than 50 years later, to have to discuss George Floyd in the very same terms. I mean, nothing is different about 67 and now in the respect of what is happening to Black bodies. So with that perspective, it makes it all the more important to understand what the factors are, and that this is state-sponsored violence against citizens. And so that much discussion has been about the police and policing. And so the NAACP is sponsoring a forum this Wednesday from 68 on the same CTV, where we'll be with our police commissioner and with the district attorney of Suffolk County, Rachel Rawlins, who's a Cambridge-born person, to really pick apart what is it about the police and police departments that must change fundamentally so that, you know, before George Floyd could be buried well, suddenly in Atlanta, you have as senseless a death. You know, if you really read through the chronology of what happened there, it's just absolutely incredible that there was no reason for that man to be dead at all.
Mm-hmm.
A second officer came and did not de-escalate anything. In fact, brought their own confusion. So I think one actively has to engage this. But the last thing, and this has been an interesting part, in the middle of all that, I've also gotten involved. I'm now an innovator, an inventor, and I've gotten involved with a startup company in Cambridge called HPath, which is coming up with an app. We have an app that would help you determine when you went to a restaurant, if you gave them your phone and you use our app, if you get a green light, that means you should enter. That means that your temperature, etc., would allow you to enter. If you get a red light, that means you should go and get tested for COVID-19. So just trying to, because we're really looking for ways, how will we return to colleges and universities? How will we return to elementary schools in Cambridge?
Mm-hmm.
Can we be a part of inventing the means to return us to a semblance of what we knew in terms of socializing? I don't mean that we need to return to the sociological situation that we left. In fact, I hope we may have left it. But it's an inventive time. So these are the best of times and the worst of times. And
but
Frederick Douglass said, where there is no struggle, there is no progress. So this is the struggle.
But you kind of turned the corner on an important question that speaks about Black businesses and how we're suffering so much greater than the rest of the community. And so I'm glad to hear that you're being entrepreneurial, but it makes me think about, we talked about what's going on and how we're handling COVID-19 in this context of all else that's going on. I look around all the stores that are shuttered, that are not going to bounce back, and how that impacts our community in terms of Black and brown businesses who are barely holding on because they're not getting equal opportunity to some of the resources that the federal and local government have to send into the community. So you're right. It's the best times, and that people are now focused on it, but it's the worst time. And then to go back to the idea of police community relations, what happened to Atlanta, I strongly believe, was backlash. They are just so angry about what's going on. You know, why can't we just go away? I don't care if you're mad, just go away. So the behavior is almost retaliatory. Well, I might not be able to get you here, but I'm going to get you somewhere else. I was absolutely appalled. You would think someone would exercise some foresight that with all the light shining down on violence against the Black community, they would go ahead and be more violent against someone of the Black community. So, you know, we're in so many ways, it's heartening that our white allies and others are getting into the fray. It's still so disheartening that this violence on a daily basis still occurs.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the systematic nature of it. And I think if there's anything to celebrate in this moment, is that that's starting to click in people's brains, that this is not about whether or not somebody says the N-word or not, although that person's thoughts, you know, as it relates to what gets them to say some of that stuff out loud, you know, is questionable. But that's just one aspect of the construct of race. And I'm really excited that Webster moved forward with redefining what racism is recently because of everything that's happening, to add in the systematic aspect to the definition. I mean, like, Ken said, best of times, worst of times. I'm really interested in Dr. Francis' response because she works at this institution that serves mostly people of color. And I'm just curious, in this time, how's your institution and your work being impacted by COVID? And what does it look like for your students?
Yes, thank you, Manikka. Thanks for asking. And Aisha's fine.
Okay. You earned those degrees, Doctor.
I did earn my degree.
Black community. We like titles.
This is true. Well, we're
It's
my
our
family.
crown. It's just one of our many crowns.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys. Thank y'all. Let's see, where do I dive in to be succinct? So Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology, as Manikka shared, is a technical college that serves primarily Black and Brown men of color. We're 75% students of color, minority serving institution in Boston. I often describe it as an HBCU in Boston. So it's one of the things I love about it. And we have had students participate in protests. One of the first organized protests that was in Roxbury in front of the Boston Police Headquarters. We know of at least one student who was arrested as part of the resistance there. We are planning a forum to give students a chance to air their feelings. And what I have been doing in the midst of this, so I'm a chief of staff, which, I have the opportunity to really help advance multiple agendas. And part of the time I'm using my social capital to enhance what it is that we're doing. So I've connected the college with a group called the Wellness Collaborative, which is a group of women of color who are physicians and clinicians to help organize our forum. We have wellness staff. They are not people of color. And it was very important to them but to me personally during this moment that I helped the college get resources so that they could respond in a way that's culturally appropriate and culturally sensitive. Particularly in a time when we are not physically connected, it's been very hard to have a finger on the pulse of how our students are doing when we can't gather. So we're going to gather them virtually at a point to be determined, and we're doing that in a proper way. This is one of my children coming in.
Oh, good.
So, I will just use this opportunity. This is Christopher to say, part of the other way that I've been thinking about resistance is, thinking about how you build the foundation for your family. What do we talk about? What do we say about the world around us in this moment? And I've been very careful about that. We have television, but only streaming. I've been very careful in curating what they're exposed to because I want them to be carefree, right? Not ignorant, but carefree. And so thinking about what the books that we read and the conversations we have and how we and the people around us respond, how we respond to this moment has been very important. So I think the last thing I want to say in terms of the businesses that are being impacted, there is I don't know the term that they're using for it, but the Black Math Coalition is a group of multiple organizations, including the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts and others that are putting forth a set of demands, not requests, demands of the state around supporting Black businesses. And I think that manifesto or those demands will be out imminently. If not in the next couple of days, certainly by the end of the week. And that is going to be, I think, an important clarion call as to how systemically the pressure, the downward pressure on Black businesses can be addressed. And I hope that more things will be structurally put into place as a result of all of these multiple pandemics so that we can come out of this moment different.
Yeah, it's interesting, the piece that you said around, trying to structure your family and your household to to be able to manage some joy in the middle of kind of all the chaos that we find ourselves in. I'm not sure if anyone remember, there was this image, I want to say it started circulating online maybe about a week or two ago, and it was this young Black girl that was at a protest. She had fabulous beads in her hair, and she just had such passion as it relates to the protest. And it started going around on the internet. And I have to say, I was hurt by it a bit, because you know, a 6-year-old girl out on the street in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm glad that her parents are exposing her to standing up for the rights of our people, and I think that's going to carry her for a very long ways. And at the same time, I thought to myself, man, why our kids have such a burden, and you know, those two things can coexist in the same space. So I know from my household, I've been really intentional about not going out too much. I have a 4-month-old. I'm like protecting her immune system at all costs. So won't see me at too many protests out there, but also as it relates to my older daughter who's 6, exposing her to the moment that we're in, but also giving her the space to just to be free. Because it's something, as we think about Juneteenth, going back to that theme, when have Black people had the space to just experience freedom and allow that to shape them and their trajectory in life without it having to be negotiated? So I know that she's going to have to negotiate it at some point, but I'm trying to create that balance right now. Councilor Simmons, any questions that we're getting from any of our viewers right now? Do you have any questions for our panel before we have to close out this segment? Oh, you're muted.
One question that came up was, you know, and it was what do we say to our children? So in this COVID-19 pandemic, and with this virus of racism that's being thrust on us, a number of young people have graduated. And what does that graduation look like? And so one of the questions that came through was, what messages should we be sending to our young people about this? And I'll lead off by saying, and Ken, you won't believe this, somebody graduated from the 8th grade.
I don't believe it.
Right. I remember we were at Pride and she was like this, and now she's in 8th grade getting ready to ascend to the high school. And the conversation we had with her in this viral graduation is so different than the one we would have had she graduated last year. Was that, yes, you're going to the high school, but then we're having this other sort of side conversation, is you're a Black woman going to the high school. And what does that mean for you as a Black woman going to the high school? And, you know, she wants to be among her friends. So keep yourself safe while you're with your friends. But then there's the other question of, and I don't know how many parents have this conversation, when you go to your friend's house, never go in a room by yourself. Because you don't want, if something's missing, you're the first person they're going to blame, you know, and those kinds of questions. So one of the question, and I hope I'm paraphrasing properly, is what do you say? What are you saying to your children? Because I think we have a young person, and you're not a child by any stretch, Maya, but you're a young person. You know, what messages are coming to you and to Aisha and to Jeff and Ken as a grand uncle? What are you saying to our upcoming young people to how to negotiate this world? How do you have that freedom you talk about? How do you enjoy just being a kid with this cloud of color and racism and discrimination always hovering over you? And you know, and it's double if you're a woman. So I open the floor to anyone. I think we have one other question on the top of that, but
I'm going to share a resource in the chat. I'm going to let other people talk, but I am sharing a resource from the Theater for Young Adults, I believe is the resource, and it's a series of free plays, and it's really dialogues between 1 or 2 people that you can talk to with your children. They have them for kids ages 5 all the way to young adulthood, and in a way that in our household we introduced some of the concepts in a way that I have felt comfortable with. We're a big theater family, so I'll just share that. And then
I'm curious, you know, Maya, you know, you're at the high school. I'm curious how you're having these conversations, and what are you telling your peers, as well as, I know you have younger sisters. You know, how are you having these conversations?
I think with like my friends in the high school, everything is like really blatant. It's like no protection whatsoever, because it's really hard to like live your life when you know like this is happening and you could be doing something about it. So I think everyone is kind of like doing the best they can to like do something to have an impact for that. But in terms of like my younger sister, she's 12, and like this is the first time she's like heard of anything like this. So she like keeps reading things and then coming and telling me like, oh my God, this is happening. It's like all new to her, but it's not to me. So it's like kind of sad to see like how it's like impacting like what she's like learning about the world, and it's all just being like thrown in her face right now. So it's hard, I think, for anyone to like deal with.
If I could say something, I would just say, I want to thank you, Manikka, and you, Councilor Simmons, for bringing it to the attention of the city that the children of the city are under various psychological pressures because of the virus, and that this notion that they can just be at home and talk via remotely and they'll just be sort of dying to receive the information is uninformed. That we're in a traumatic time, and the trauma is shared by everybody, including the young people. So it was introduced to me. I have a wonderful grandnephew who Simmons knows quite well, and you know, he decided he didn't want to leave the house because he didn't want to get the virus. And he was serious. And it took me a while to sort of really pick up on the fact that we'll go with his flow. Now, it ended up in him getting a new dog that he had to walk. But my point is, it is a lot of people are impacted. And then there are many people, you know, I've been involved in work having to do with men of color in health. And many Black men have underlying conditions. And those who are lucky enough to be over 60 have to really remember that as they go about or not. And I sometimes think to myself, well, I'd like to be here or there, but then I get reminded at home that, you know, you would best to let that go and do something else, because the protection of your own health is a very important thing that you have to pay attention to. So learning to do that for somebody like me is a little hard, but it's everywhere. But I'm so pleased that you brought the wonderful, wonderful women to talk about what's going on psychologically with kids in Cambridge. It took my knowledge, and I think for many in the city, to a whole new level of how to understand the impact of this in the most granular sense on the most young people.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Jeff. I'll get to you right quick. I'm right to you, but I want to just respond to Ken right quick. I think particularly as someone that sits on the school committee, we have this continuum, right? We have parents that's like, I'm done with virtual learning and I'm not going to let this stress me out. We will give my kid what he or she needs and it will be all right. And then you have another end of the spectrum of, you know, great concern, because historically we've always been underserved in the system. And as a leader in the city, I've had to like manage between all of that. But the reality is that our whole system got thrown into a place that professionals pretty much was not prepared to do. I mean, one's ability to manage technology is vastly different depending on your skill set. And that's not something that we taught, we prepared for. We did not prepare our educators for remote learning. So for me, it's been really managing like all of people's concerns and emotions, as well as managing the reality of the situation to ensure as we move forward, we have to figure out a way to get this done. But in the short term, you know, our psychological well-being, our teachers, our students, our families is really important. And we just have to figure out the balance and be able to manage people's fears, anxieties, and hurts and pains, as well as manage the fact that we all have to adjust to a new normal. and work with the public around that, because that's going to be difficult. So Jeff, please jump in.
Yeah, thank you. It's Father's Day, and I'd be remiss. I need to give a shout out to the Cambridge Health Alliance, and there's a Cambridge Nurturing Fathers program. So to Woman Simmons' point, like, part of that program that I participated in last year helped me do a lot of internal work to think about fatherhood as a community health issue, or the lack thereof, right? And it's not just like being physically present, but it's being emotionally present. So learning and doing the work of how do I process my own emotion, how do I process our own history, how do I process my ability to live an anti-racist life, has led me to, talk to my 5-year-old and 3-year-old sons about concepts of fairness, kindness, love, talking about how ideas are not unique, are specific to certain racial groups, but ideas are something that any person can have. And some are good ideas, and some lead to good ideas and good actions, and some bad ideas lead to bad actions. And that's how you can talk about how police officers can kill someone in the line of service, or things like that, right? But it's also taking that and pulling it back, our history back, from like not just talking about MLK and Rosa and Harriet, but also including stories of Audre Lorde and James Baldwin, Angela Davis, and things like that. And so we try to like infuse those stories into these everyday concepts. And as a man, as a father, looking at my own emotional impacts and processing it and saying, hey, daddy's real sad right now, and here's why, and this is what I'm going to do to work through it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think it was so important that we had a Black father on today's show today. So thank you, Jeff, for taking time away from your Father's Day celebration to be with us. I know our time is coming to a close. And so one last question, if we can take 2 minutes or less to answer this question. But what's your advice to the Black community and beyond, quite frankly, around how do we continue to manage this very real public health crises of the intersection of COVID-19 and racism? What are your words for our viewers today? Let's start with Dr. Francis, or Aisha. Sorry, Aisha.
I'm going to take the last words of Hannah Nicole Jones, who I had the benefit of hearing speak about the 1619 Project pre-COVID quarantine life. Mm-hmm. And her last words of her public lecture were, listen to Black women. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to say that many of the solutions that I do believe that solutions will be imparted as a result of this. Many of those solutions are things that educated, informed Black people have been saying for 100 years or more. People just need to listen and change and have the will to change and do it. So that is my final word: listen and change.
Ashe. Maya, what's your words for us today?
I think staying educated on everything that's going on is really important, because you can't, or not have a valid opinion, but like it's going to be much harder to understand everything that's going on without being fully educated on what's going on. So.
I appreciate that. Ken, what do you have for us?
I would say look around you and take your inspiration. I mean, the parents and the young people on this very call have given me a fill up of some new oil to keep chugging forward. But I also would offer this. I have a favorite scripture, which is, it says, be courageous, do not be terrified or dismayed, for the Lord your God will be with you always. Mm. If you're armed with that, nothing can harm you. So I think going forward, just claim this birthright to the connection to Africa and the connection to each other and this awful American history, which has made us something special and different and will get us through. I'm certain of it.
Amen and ashe. Jeff, what are your words for us?
I'm going to borrow the words from our griot, James Baldwin. The quote is, "Nothing that is faced not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And I say that because I encourage folks to be courageous in this moment. For me, I think that involves looking in a mirror. You can't change the world if you can't help yourself and change yourself and do that work. And as a truth, growing up as an American in this American society, we've been fed a lot of poison when it comes to white supremacy and what that means in terms of like success and being successful. And let's kind of do that work. Let's look in the mirror, to everyone's point, look at our history, listen to Black women, and know that this is not, the struggle has been going on for hundreds of years, and do our self-work so we can continue to pay that legacy justice.
Yes, I'll jump in with my last word before Councilor Simmons jump in. One of my favorite sayings I heard when I was doing a study abroad trip in South Africa, and it's, when you're on the edge of a cliff, progress is not measured by taking a step forward. And we're in a moment, particularly as the Black community, with everything that's happening, that sometimes I don't think we give ourselves permission to take a step back. Other people that look different from us with different experiences, they are stepping up right now. And I just want to give people permission, if they can. You can function however you want to in the world, but I know a lot of us are tired, and it's okay to take a step back. Councilor Simmons, what are your words? Oh, you're muted.
That's why we have young people on the call for technology support. I think it has really all been said. Every one of these, I've walked away with a little bit more fortification, a little bit more inspiration, a lot more education. And I thank my co-facilitator and co-moderator for that. I want to thank each of you. You've been tremendous. Again, every time I sit through one of these, it's what else can I do? And we're all already doing enough. Listen to Black women. That I think that's important, because Black women have been the bedrock of this community, our inspiration, or looking to our elders, as you mentioned, Ken, or what Jeff talked about, which we don't do enough, I believe, which is remember and teach our history. And I just want to reiterate that we can no longer let the responsibility of other institutions to educate our children about who we are. We have to educate our children about who we are. It is our duty and our responsibility. And most importantly of that, committed to writing. Leave a written testimony. We go to lots of funerals, and at those funerals, there's the obituary, and that's obituary. You find out the history about something that you never knew before. And that's not the way we should be passing on our story. We should be very thoughtful and intentional about passing on our story. So I just wanted to say that because it came to mind, particularly Jeff, when you said history. But the other thing that came up, I want to just mention very quickly, is about going back to normal. And over this celebration observance of Juneteenth, I had an opportunity to speak a few times, and one thing I said, and I'm going to continue to say, I don't want to go back to normal. I want to go back to better. And so if we do anything, we have to make sure that we are better. The people who's gotten behind us, is walking beside us, and we have to continue to keep them engaged, to tell them we don't want normal, we want better. We want it better for us. We want our Juneteenth now. We want our 40 acres and a meal now. We want the full endowment of that contract called the Constitution for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So I'm hoping that this has re-energized us to do that. I hope that in 2 weeks, I think it is July 5th, that folks will tune in. We're going to be talking about COVID-19 and how its impact on the Black business community. I might be calling you, Dr. Francis Samuels, for some more information. but to talk about how it has really impacted our community. We're going to have a representative from BECMA. We will be having some of our local business owners, and Pearson. I'm going to draw a blank on all the names, so shame on me, but I would certainly ask you to tune into that on the 1st, July 5th at 1 o'clock. And if I had to, it's not a quote necessarily, it's just a statement that we all remember, and that is the struggle continues.
Indeed, indeed, it does continue. And I want to thank everyone for being here. You know, happy Juneteenth weekend, and to our fathers, we lift you up and we're grateful for you and what you represent within our community. So thanks for tuning in. Thank you to our guests, and to be continued in 2 weeks. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I do it.